The day has finally arrived. Frosthaven is finally here. We finally have this big, giant box. It's been on its own epic journey, but it finally made its way to us, and we're about to start our first campaign. So I thought I'd take a minute to go over 5 rules that I came across reading the 40-page manual for this guy that might be helpful for you before you head into your first campaign. I'm Jeremy Henderson with Elevation Games, and the box is not the only giant thing about this guy. As I said, the instruction manual for Frosthaven is about 40 pages long. It's really useful and helpful. The folks at Cephalofair have really nicely highlighted in blue all the stuff that's new for Frosthaven. So it's a really good resource if you've got it and you're the rules person for your group. First of all, my sympathies, I feel you. But secondly, it is a good resource, and reading through it really helped me get ready for our first big campaign. But there are a few things that are new or different, or things that just tend to get overlooked, even about Gloomhaven, that I thought it might be good to go over as Frosthaven is starting to make its way to folks and they're getting ready to start their first campaigns. So rule number 1, thing that confounds board gamers everywhere and almost every board game, that's monster AI, monster movement and attacks. So the Frosthaven system is basically the same as the one you found in Gloomhaven. It's pretty straightforward. Monsters are generally going to target whichever character is closest to them, whichever character they can attack with the least amount of movement. Then, once they've determined that, they will move in order to avoid disadvantage. So monster AI fires in sequences, right? And this is how it worked in Gloomhaven. They will, as I said, look at whoever they can get to and attack with least movement. Then they'll decide, after making that determination and picking a focus, then they'll decide if they need to move to avoid disadvantage. Now, there is one important update here for Frosthaven. Further down the decision tree in Gloomhaven was how many targets can I attack. So if you've got an enemy who's drawn a card with multiple targets on it this round, and they can hit 2, 3, whatever targets, that would be further down the decision tree in Gloomhaven. In Frosthaven, it's actually the first thing that they look at. So a monster will actually move and prioritize doing damage to the largest amount of allowable targets before they consider anything else. So that's an important thing to note here. This can come into effect in a lot of different situations, but it is important to know that when they're moving, they're going to move wherever it's going to set them up, if they have an attack with multiple targets, to hit multiple targets. We've also got some new status effects in this box. Regenerate has made its way over from Forgotten Circles. That's one that heals you over time, the same way that it did in that game. A couple of effects have been tweaked a little for Frosthaven. Invisibility, for instance. You can no longer turn invisible and stand in a doorway and block enemies from finding a focus. As neat a trick as that was in Gloomhaven, they have effectively patched that out for Frosthaven. So now enemies can move through you. They can't occupy the same space that you're in the same way you cannot occupy the same space that an invisible enemy is in. But you can move through them as if they weren't there, and they can move through you as if you weren't there to get to an enemy. assuming that they have enough movement points to do that, of course. So, important update to invisibility there. You also have some completely new status effects coming into play here. For instance, we have Ward. Ward is going to make you take half the damage on the next source of damage that hits you. Brittle is just the opposite. It's going to make you take double damage from the next source of damage that hits you. So you'll notice I worded that very carefully there. The next source of damage that hits you. So these only fire when you're actually dealt damage. So if you have Ward or Brittle cast on you, and an enemy attacks you and they draw a 0 and just whiff, or they draw a -1, -2, and end up doing 0 damage, that buff or debuff stays in place. It doesn't go away. It only triggers and then goes away once some damage has actually been dealt to you. So Ward will only go away once it's actually blocked damage, and Brittle will only go away once you've actually taken some damage. Important to note there. You've also got Bane, a really kind of scary sounding new status effect. It's pretty straightforward. At the end of your turn, you just take a flat 10 damage. Boom, that's it. If someone can remove it from you before the end of your turn, great, you can avoid the 10 damage. If they don't, you're going to take the 10 damage. 10 is a lot. That's a lot of damage. So that's something you probably want to try and get removed or avoid if you can manage it. The final new status effect we have in here is Impair. Impair basically just keeps you from using items. That's it. You have Impair on you, then on your next turn you can't use any of your items. If you have already used an item and gotten some sort of buff from it, you get to keep that. The ongoing effects from any item, you get to keep those, but you can't trigger any new items on your next turn. And then at the end of your turn, it goes away, like a lot of these status effects. But that brings us to our third point here, healing. This is the same in Frosthaven as it was in Gloomhaven, but it's something people tend to overlook a little bit. Most of you, if you play Gloomhaven, know poison is a special case, right? Poison actually blocks healing from any healing source. So, for instance, if you're poisoned and someone heals you, they don't actually heal you for any amount of HP. They just remove the poison, which is great. You want that poison removed, but obviously, someone doesn't want to burn a really big heal to just remove poison, right? But the important thing to note is that poison is the only debuff that acts that way. So you could have Brittle and a Wound and a Bane all cast on you, and that's you've had a pretty bad round if that's the case, but who knows, it could happen. One source of healing will remove all of those negative debuffs and heal you for whatever amount it's supposed to heal you for. If we're not talking about poison, healing also gives you HP in return, as well as removing those debuffs, which is important to remember. They've also changed the way that Regenerate triggers a little bit here. So Regenerate actually triggers before something like Wound. So it's actually a way for you to remove a wound, for instance, before it triggers. You can cast Regenerate on someone and it'll actually heal that wound before it damages them. But let's talk about items. So this is another thing that's been updated for Frosthaven here. Items work the same way as in the previous games. You can only wear one helmet, one chest piece, one item in each hand, or a big item in both hands. If you've played Gloomhaven or Jaws of the Lion, you know how this works. Items with a little bag icon, you can carry as many of those as your level divided by 2 rounded up. So, for instance, as soon as you get to level 3, you can carry 2 of those. Because 3 divided in half, 1.5, you round it up 2, right? And obviously that number is higher the more levels you get. So that's important to keep track of. But the new thing here is if you happen to pick up an item during a scenario, you get to use it immediately. So, for instance, let's say you're already wearing a helmet and you happen to draw a helmet out of the loot pile, the random item that's in the loot deck. You actually get to immediately equip and use that. So it ignores your equipment limit. You can wear 2 helmets, you can wear 2 chest pieces, or hold 3 swords. It just for that scenario that you're on. Now, as soon as the scenario is over and you go back to Frosthaven, you need to, give that to another player, sell it, do whatever you need to with it. You won't be allowed to keep using it. But you are allowed to use it in the scenario that you find it in. So you can end up with some pretty powerful boosts that way, potentially, that blow right past your equipment limit if you happen to pick up an item in a scenario like that. The final thing I want to talk about here is losing cards. So this is not new for Frosthaven. This works the same way in all of the Haven games, but it is something people tend to overlook. So when you take a rest, you take either a long rest or a short rest. On a short rest, you have to randomly draw one of your cards out of your discard pile and lose that card for the rest of the scenario. On a long rest, you get to pick which card you want to lose. But let's say you need to take a short rest for whatever reason. You randomly draw one of your cards and, it's your big heal or it's your big attack. You don't want to lose that. Well, you have an option now. You can suffer 1 damage, keep that card, and draw another one at random and lose that card instead. Odds are it's not often going to be worth taking a damage to do that. But there are probably going to be some situations where it will be. To avoid losing a really key card, it might be worth taking that 1 damage to avoid that scenario. Similarly, it's important to remember that when you do take damage, you always have the option of negating it by losing a card. So if you're in a situation where you're going to take enough damage that it's going to incapacitate you and you're going to be out of the game, you may instead want to sacrifice a card to avoid that. Better to lose a card than to just be taken out of the scenario completely, right? The important thing to note here, though, is that it only negates the damage. So if, for instance, an enemy is about to hit you with some big attack and deal 6 damage and poison you, you'll avoid the 6 damage by sacrificing that card, but you won't avoid the poison. You'll still get poisoned. So any status effects that they were going to dish out will still happen. You will just evade the damage. So that's it. That's the 5 rules or sort of areas that I wanted to go over for Frosthaven before jumping in. Let me know if this is something you guys like. We can certainly do some more of these. We're going to be playing a lot of this game starting pretty soon here. So be sure to like and subscribe to get notified when new stuff for this gets posted. And we will see you next time. Thanks.